The world never stops moving. People rush from place to place, focused on their own lives, their own worries, their own plans. Cars speed down busy roads, headlights cutting through the dim evening light. Conversations blend into background noise. Footsteps echo on pavement, and the hum of the city never truly fades. It is a world where things go unnoticed. And on this particular evening, something, or rather, someone, was being forgotten. A small, fragile body lay on the side of the road. A tiny creature, curled into itself, as if trying to disappear into the asphalt. A puppy, alone, dying. Its fur was matted with dirt, clinging to its thin frame. Its ribs pressed through its skin. Its breathing was shallow, its heartbeat weak. A fresh wound marred its side, a dark smear against the pavement. It had once been full of life. Perhaps it had played in the streets, chased after falling leaves, felt the warmth of the sun on its fur. But now, there was only pain. A quiet whimper escaped its lips. A final plea. A desperate whisper into a world that had already moved on. Would anyone hear it? Would anyone stop? Or would this be the end? Cars passed, their wheels rolling just inches away from the motionless form. People walked by, eyes fixed on their phones, their minds elsewhere. No one saw. Or maybe they did, and chose not to. Perhaps they told themselves it was already too late, that someone else would help, that stopping would only delay their own plans. Excuses, reasons to keep walking. And so, the puppy lay there, time slipping away, its body too weak to fight anymore. But then, a shadow fell over it. A pair of worn-out sneakers stopped just inches away. A voice, soft but steady. "Oh God, little one, what happened to you?" The puppy flinched. It had learned not to trust, not to hope, but hope had just arrived. And this stranger, this ordinary person on an ordinary day, was about to change everything. Daniel had been on his way home, his thoughts drifting between work and the list of things he still needed to do that evening. He had almost missed it. Almost. The small, broken shape lying near the curb could have been a piece of trash, a forgotten piece of clothing, anything but what it really was. But something in his gut told him to look again. And when he did, his heart clenched. A puppy. It was barely breathing, its body barely moving. He felt his pulse quicken. He wasn't a vet. He wasn't an expert. He wasn't even sure if the puppy was still alive. But something in him refused to walk away. He crouched down, reaching out carefully, afraid to startle it. "Hey, buddy," he whispered. "Can you hear me?" A weak whimper. That was all it took. Daniel's mind raced. What was he supposed to do? Was there even time to save it? The doubt was immediate. The hesitation. But then came something stronger. Determination. He could not leave it here. Not like this. His hands trembled as he scooped the puppy up. Its body was so light, so fragile. It barely reacted, its head lolling weakly against his chest. "Hang on, little one," he murmured. "I've got you now." And for the first time in what must have felt like forever, the puppy was not alone. Daniel rushed to his car, his heart pounding in his chest. His fingers fumbled for his phone as he placed the puppy gently on the passenger seat. He could see it struggling to breathe, its tiny chest rising and falling unevenly. He swallowed the lump in his throat and dialed the number for the nearest veterinary clinic. "I found a puppy. It's injured. It's not moving much." The voice on the other end cut in. "Bring it in. Now." That was all he needed to hear. The engine roared to life. The city blurred past him, neon lights flashing against the windshield. Every red light felt like a lifetime. Every second felt stolen from the puppy's already fragile existence. He kept glancing at the tiny form beside him, whispering reassurances. "Just hold on, buddy. Please, hold on." But he did not know if it could hear him. He did not know if it would make it. All he knew was that he had to try. Because in a world that had kept moving, he had stopped. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The clinic doors burst open as Daniel rushed inside, the puppy cradled against his chest. The smell of antiseptic, the hum of fluorescent lights, the quiet urgency of the room. A vet tech rushed forward. "Over here." Daniel barely had time to explain before they gently lifted the tiny body from his arms, placing it onto a small examination table. Wires, tubes, fast movements, a flurry of hands, working quickly. Voices speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Daniel stood frozen, his breath caught in his throat. The vet looked up. "It's weak, but it's alive." Relief crashed over him like a wave, but it was short-lived. "We are going to do everything we can," the vet continued, "but it's not out of danger yet." Daniel nodded. He had already made his choice. "Tell me what I need to do." Because he wasn't walking away. Not now. Not ever. Somewhere in that clinic, a tiny heartbeat struggled to keep going. Somewhere in that clinic, a life was hanging by a thread. And somewhere in that clinic, a man who had been just another passerby only moments ago now found himself fighting for something more. For a life that almost no one had noticed. For a soul that had been abandoned. For a creature who, in its final moments, had been seen. Would the puppy survive? Would Daniel's decision be enough? Or had he simply delayed the inevitable? One thing was certain. This was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The night pressed in around Daniel as he sped toward the vet clinic. The city lights blurred through his windshield, streaking against the raindrops that had begun to fall. The wipers moved in slow, rhythmic motions, but his focus was elsewhere. The puppy lay on the passenger seat, its small body barely moving beneath the old towel Daniel had wrapped around it. Every few moments, he reached over, his fingers brushing against its fur, searching for warmth, for movement, for anything that told him it was still holding on. "Just a little longer," he whispered. "We are almost there." The weight of responsibility pressed heavy on his chest. He had no idea what he was doing. He had never rescued an animal before. He was just an ordinary man on his way home. And yet, in that moment, the life of this fragile creature was in his hands. A life so many others had ignored. A life he refused to let slip away. The vet clinic was quiet, except for the distant hum of medical equipment and the occasional bark from the recovery area. The moment Daniel stepped inside, the receptionist's expression shifted. Recognition, urgency. "Are you the one who called about the puppy?" Daniel nodded, tightening his grip on the bundle in his arms. A vet tech appeared almost instantly, guiding him toward the examination room. "Give it to me," she said gently but firmly. Daniel hesitated for just a second before handing over the small, weightless body. As soon as the puppy was placed on the stainless steel examination table, a team of medical staff sprang into action. The overhead light illuminated every painful detail. Bruised skin beneath patchy fur, a gash near its hind leg, ribs protruding beneath thin layers of muscle. The vet, a middle-aged woman with tired but kind eyes, ran her hands carefully over the puppy's body. "We need fluids. Oxygen. Let's get its temperature." A vet tech inserted a needle into the puppy's tiny foreleg, attaching an foredrip. Another placed an oxygen mask over its small snout. Daniel stood frozen, helpless, watching the whirlwind of medical intervention unfold. "Will it survive?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The vet sighed. "It is too early to tell. It is severely dehydrated and malnourished. There are signs of blunt force trauma. Could have been hit, or worse." A cold shiver ran down Daniel's spine. "Or worse." The vet's lips pressed into a thin line. "Sometimes, stray animals are abused, left for dead." Daniel clenched his fists. The thought made his stomach twist. Who would do something like that? But there was no answer. Only the faint, labored breaths of the tiny soul fighting for its life. The minutes stretched into hours. Daniel paced the waiting room, the sterile scent of antiseptic clinging to his clothes. He had been offered coffee, but he could barely stomach the thought of drinking it. Every few minutes, he checked his phone, though he had no messages, no calls. No one knew he was here. No one knew about the battle happening behind those clinic doors. But Daniel knew, and he could not leave. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the vet emerged. She looked tired, but there was a flicker of something in her expression. It made it through the first few hours. Relief flooded through Daniel, his knees nearly buckling. But it is not out of danger yet. It is weak. The next 24 hours are critical. We will keep it here, monitor its progress. But it needs constant care. Daniel nodded. He knew what she was saying. It might not make it. He swallowed past the lump in his throat. "Can I see it?" The recovery room was quiet, save for the soft beeping of monitors. The puppy lay in a small incubator, wrapped in a fleece blanket, for tubes still attached. Daniel pulled up a chair, his hands resting on his knees. "Hey, little one." The puppy's eyes fluttered open, just for a second. A flicker of recognition. Daniel felt something deep in his chest shift. This was not just a stray. Not just an animal he had found on the street. This was something more. Something fragile. Something worth fighting for. The following days were a blur of careful hope and cautious steps. The clinic staff worked tirelessly, ensuring the puppy received fluids, nutrition, and medication. It was touch and go. Some mornings, the vet would shake her head, saying its vitals were unstable. Other mornings, she would smile and say, "It ate a little today." Each small victory felt monumental. Daniel visited every day. He sat by its incubator, reading aloud, telling stories about his childhood dog, about the places he had traveled, about anything at all. He did not know if the puppy could understand, but he knew that it could hear. And that mattered, because for the first time in its life, it was not alone. A week passed, and then another. Slowly, the puppy regained strength. It could lift its head. It could move its paws. And then, one day, as Daniel reached out to touch its fur, a tiny tail wagged. Just once. But it was enough. Daniel laughed, a sound full of relief and emotion. "You are a fighter, aren't you?" The puppy blinked up at him, and for the first time, Daniel saw something in its eyes. "Trust." "Lucky," Daniel whispered. "That is your name now." Because against all odds, it had survived. The day finally came when Lucky was strong enough to leave the clinic. Daniel stood at the reception desk, filling out the final paperwork. The vet handed him a small bundle wrapped in a soft towel. Lucky. He fit perfectly in Daniel's arms, just as he had that first night. Only this time, he was going home. Lucky had never known a real home before. At first, he was hesitant. He flinched at sudden movements, hesitated before eating, curled up in the smallest corner he could find. But Daniel was patient. He sat on the floor, waiting. He left the food bowl nearby, letting Lucky come to it on his own. And one night, Lucky curled up beside him, pressing his tiny body against Daniel's leg. It was trust. It was love. It was the moment that changed everything. Lucky grew stronger every day. He learned how to play, how to wag his tail without fear, how to love without hesitation. And Daniel, he learned that sometimes, the best things in life are the ones we never planned for, the ones that find us when we least expect it, the ones that remind us that in a world that keeps moving, sometimes, stopping changes everything. The first time Lucky stepped into the backyard, he hesitated. The soft grass beneath his tiny paws was unfamiliar. The open space, the endless sky, he had never known anything like it. For a long moment, he just stood there, ears perked, nose twitching, taking it all in. Daniel knelt beside him, letting him adjust at his own pace. "It's okay, buddy. You are safe now." Lucky took a cautious step forward, then another. And then, as if realizing the world was no longer something to fear, he started to run. His legs were still weak, his movements wobbly, but there was joy in them. Pure, unfiltered joy. Daniel felt a lump rise in his throat. Only weeks ago, Lucky had been dying on the side of the road. Now, he was running. Now, he was free. Even as Lucky grew stronger, the past did not leave him so easily. Some nights, Daniel would wake up to the sound of whimpering. Lucky, curled up in his bed, trembling, lost in memories of cold nights, hunger, loneliness. Daniel would reach out, running his fingers through Lucky's fur, whispering softly, "You are safe now. No one will hurt you again." And slowly, Lucky would settle. His breathing would even out. His body would relax. But the scars of abandonment take time to heal. Daniel knew this, and he was willing to wait. Because trust, once broken, is not rebuilt overnight. It is earned, day by day, with love, with patience, with the quiet promise that no matter what, he was not alone anymore. Time passed. Lucky grew stronger, his ribs no longer visible beneath his fur. His tail wagged more freely. His eyes, once dull and fearful, now sparkled with mischief and curiosity. He had learned that food would always be there, that hands could bring kindness instead of pain, that voices could be soft instead of harsh. And Daniel, he learned something, too, that love is not just about saving someone. It is about showing up for them, every day, even when it is hard, even when the scars of the past whisper that trust is dangerous. It is about proving, over and over again, that they are worth it, that they are loved. And Lucky, he was loved more than he would ever know. The first time Daniel took Lucky to the park, he wondered if it was too soon. Would Lucky be afraid? Would he panic at the sight of other dogs, other people? But as they stepped onto the path, something incredible happened. Lucky's tail wagged. Not out of fear, out of excitement. It was the first time Daniel had seen that kind of happiness in him. The kind that said, "I belong here." Lucky sniffed at the grass, trotted beside Daniel, occasionally glancing up as if to say, "Is this really for me?" Daniel smiled. "Yes, buddy, this is all for you." And for the first time, Lucky wasn't just surviving. He was living. Lucky's journey was one of survival, of hope, of proving that even the smallest, most fragile lives matter. He had been left to die, but someone had stopped. Someone had seen him, and that had changed everything. Daniel often thought about that day. How easy it would have been to keep walking. How many people had. But he hadn't. And because of that, Lucky was here, breathing, running, loving, alive. And in that, Daniel found the greatest lesson of all. That kindness, no matter how small, has the power to change a life. That stopping, noticing, caring, can make all the difference. Not just for the ones we save, but for ourselves, too. Not every abandoned animal is found in time. Not every story has a happy ending. But sometimes, it does. Because someone stopped. Because someone cared. Daniel did not have to stop that day. But he did. And because of that, Lucky got a second chance at life. The question is, if you were in Daniel's shoes, would you stop? Would you take that moment to change a life? Because out there, right now, there is another Lucky, waiting, hoping, fighting to survive. And maybe, just maybe, they are waiting for you. If this story touched your heart, share it. Let others see the power of kindness. And if you have ever witnessed or experienced something like this, tell us in the comments. Because your story might inspire someone to stop. And that could save a life today.